California. Christmas floods are destroying everything, and scientists are terrified by the scale, because what is happening right now is not just the worst flooding in California history, it is a catastrophe so massive, it is literally changing the shape of the state in real time. Picture entire cities vanishing under walls of water on Christmas morning, families trapped on rooftops, watching their neighborhoods disappear, and emergency responders completely overwhelmed by floods that are rewriting every disaster manual ever written. We are talking about water levels that are breaking records set over 150 years ago, turning highways into rivers and turning Christmas into a fight for survival. But here is what has scientists in complete terror. The flooding is not just destroying what is above ground. Satellite imagery shows the massive weight of floodwater is actually causing the land itself to sink, triggering micro-earthquakes along fault lines that have not moved in decades. The Christmas floods are literally reshaping California geology. Even more shocking, seismic monitoring stations are detecting underground pressure changes that suggest this flooding could be the trigger that finally unleashes the big one. Billions of tons of water are pressing down on fault systems that are already at their breaking point. Are we watching California drown in the worst natural disaster in its history? Or is this Christmas catastrophe the final straw that triggers the megaquake scientists have been warning about for decades? December 23rd, 3:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The National Weather Service office in Sacramento issues the first life-threatening flood warning as atmospheric river number 1 makes landfall near Eureka. Within minutes, rainfall rates spike to 4 inches per hour across Humboldt County. Emergency operations centers from San Francisco to Los Angeles activate simultaneously for the first time in California history. By 5:15 a.m., the California Office of Emergency Services escalates to full crisis mode. Director Mark Chen coordinates with 58 county emergency management offices as reports flood in from every corner of the state. The Russian River rises 8 feet in just 2 hours, transforming from a peaceful waterway into a raging monster that devours everything in its path. Sonoma County issues mandatory evacuations for 12,000 residents in flood-prone areas as officials realize the scale of what is coming. The numbers are staggering and getting worse by the hour. At 6:23 a.m., atmospheric river number 2 slams into the Central Coast with unprecedented intensity. Monterey Bay records wind gusts of 85 miles per hour, while rainfall rates exceed 6 inches per hour across coastal communities that have never seen anything like this. The Salinas River transforms into a raging torrent that overwhelms century-old levees in minutes, levees that survived every major storm in California history until this Christmas morning. Interstate 101 becomes impassable near San Luis Obispo as floodwaters surge across the highway with terrifying speed. California Highway Patrol reports water depths of 8 feet covering the roadway, turning one of California's major arteries into a deadly river. Emergency responders scramble to rescue motorists trapped in submerged vehicles, but the water is rising faster than rescue teams can respond. The third atmospheric river approaches from the southwest, targeting Southern California with moisture content that satellite data shows exceeds anything in the historical record. NOAA meteorologist Dr. Lisa Rodriguez describes the convergence as 3 fire hoses of moisture aimed directly at California. Her voice carries an edge of alarm that veterans of the National Weather Service have never heard before. Emergency shelters across the state fill beyond capacity within hours of the first warnings. The American Red Cross opens 47 emergency facilities, activating every disaster response protocol in their playbook, but demand overwhelms resources immediately. Families arrive with nothing but emergency bags hastily packed in the darkness, children crying for toys left behind, elderly residents requiring immediate medical attention that overwhelmed staff struggle to provide. Power outages cascade across the state as transmission lines fail under the relentless assault of wind and water. Pacific Gas and Electric reports 340,000 customers without electricity by 8 a.m., with numbers climbing rapidly as more infrastructure fails. The darkness compounds the crisis as rescue operations struggle without streetlights and residents lose their ability to charge phones or access emergency information. The California National Guard deploys 2,400 personnel for flood rescue operations, activating units across the state in the largest emergency mobilization since the 1994 Northridge earthquake. Helicopter crews work around the clock, plucking families from rooftops as floodwaters rise faster than ground-based rescue teams can respond. Pilots describe scenes that look like something from a disaster movie. Neighborhoods transformed into lakes with only rooftops visible above the churning brown water. Transportation infrastructure collapses under the unprecedented assault. Interstate 5 closes completely between Sacramento and Los Angeles, the state's primary north-south corridor, transformed into an impassable floodway. The closure effectively cuts California in half, stranding travelers and halting all ground transportation between the state's major population centers. San Francisco International Airport cancels over 400 flights as runway flooding makes operations impossible, leaving thousands of holiday travelers stranded. Emergency responders describe conditions unlike anything in their experience. The scope of the crisis becomes clear as dawn breaks over a transformed California. Inside the California Office of Emergency Services headquarters in Sacramento, the operations floor transforms into a war room by 9 a.m. Phones ring constantly, screens flicker with color-coded alerts, and staff work in overlapping 12-hour rotations as the crisis escalates beyond all planning scenarios. Director Mark Chen moves from station to station, coordinating with FEMA officials about evacuation zones that keep expanding. Every decision carries life or death consequences. By 10:15 a.m., Governor Gavin Newsom declares a statewide emergency as the third atmospheric river makes landfall near Los Angeles. The National Guard deployment expands to 4,800 personnel, the largest domestic disaster response in California history. Helicopter rescue operations struggle against 90 miles per hour winds and zero visibility conditions. The first fatality is confirmed at 11:23 a.m. A 67-year-old man in Petaluma is swept away by floodwaters while attempting to move his car to higher ground. Within hours, the death toll climbs as rescue teams find more victims trapped in submerged vehicles. Resource strain hits immediately. Sonoma County's emergency shelters reach 150% capacity, forcing officials to open high school gymnasiums. Families sleep on cots in hallways, children cry, and elderly residents require medical attention that overwhelmed staff struggle to provide. The logistics of mass evacuation grow more complicated by the hour. In Marin County, 23,000 residents receive mandatory evacuation orders, but many roads leading to safety are already impassable. Traffic jams stretch for miles as panicked families flee rising waters. Communication systems buckle under the emergency load. Verizon reports cell tower failures across 12 counties. Emergency radio networks strain as first responders coordinate rescues in conditions they have never encountered. Power grid failures cascade across Northern California. Pacific Gas and Electric reports 680,000 customers without electricity by noon, with repair crews unable to reach damaged infrastructure due to flooding. Hospitals switch to backup generators, but fuel supplies become critical. Agricultural losses mount catastrophically. The Central Valley disappears beneath floodwaters that destroy $1.2 billion in crops within 18 hours. Dairy operations evacuate 45,000 cattle, but many farms lose everything to the relentless water. Interstate 5 remains completely closed from Redding to Los Angeles, effectively cutting California in half. Emergency responders describe a crisis beyond their training. At NOAA's Climate Prediction Center in College Park, Maryland, meteorologists stare at satellite data that defies every atmospheric model in their database. Dr. Sarah Chen, lead atmospheric scientist, reviews moisture content readings that exceed anything in the historical record. The 3 atmospheric rivers converging over California are carrying water vapor equivalent to 15 Mississippi rivers flowing through the sky. The numbers are unprecedented and terrifying. Atmospheric river number 1 shows integrated water vapor transport of 1,200 kilograms per meter per second. Normal winter storms rarely exceed 500. The second system measures 1,400. The third, now slamming Southern California, peaks at 1,600, a reading that climate models suggested was impossible under current atmospheric conditions. This display of extreme moisture transport has no modern precedent. Dr. Michael Torres at UC San Diego's Scripps Institution analyzes the storm structure with growing alarm. The atmospheric rivers are exhibiting behavior never documented in meteorological science. Instead of dissipating after landfall, they are maintaining intensity and feeding energy between each other through mechanisms that atmospheric physics cannot fully explain. This behavior is never seen in standard models. Temperature profiles reveal another disturbing anomaly. The storms are carrying tropical moisture from near the equator directly to California's coast, without the typical cooling that should occur over thousands of miles of ocean. Sea surface temperatures along the storm track measure 4 to 6 degrees Celsius above normal. NOAA's Hurricane Hunter aircraft, diverted from Atlantic operations, penetrate the atmospheric rivers to gather direct measurements. Flight meteorologist Captain Lisa Rodriguez reports conditions unlike anything in her 15-year career. She radios from inside the storm that the moisture content is off our instrument's scale. The readings are off-scale. Satellite imagery reveals the global scope of the atmospheric disruption. The jet stream has buckled into an extreme pattern that is funneling Pacific moisture directly into California. Climate scientists describe the configuration as a stuck weather pattern that could persist for weeks. International climate research centers share similar alarm. The European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts reports that their most advanced models failed to predict the intensity of the current system. These storms represent atmospheric conditions that climate models projected would not occur until 2040 or later. Maria Santos clutches her 8-year-old daughter's hand as they wade through knee-deep water toward the evacuation bus in Guerneville. Behind them, their home of 15 years disappears beneath the Russian River's relentless surge. They carry nothing but a backpack with family photos, medications, and a stuffed elephant that has not left Sophia's side since the sirens began wailing at 4 a.m. The evacuation center at Santa Rosa High School fills beyond capacity by noon. Families sleep on cots arranged in the gymnasium, children crying, elderly residents struggling with medical needs that overwhelmed volunteers can barely address. The Red Cross reports 47 emergency shelters across Northern California, housing 85,000 displaced residents. In Petaluma, 73-year-old Robert Chen refuses to leave his dairy farm despite mandatory evacuation orders. His 200 Holstein cattle stand in water up to their bellies as he struggles to move them to higher ground. He tells emergency responders that this is all he has. His neighbor, dairy farmer Susan Martinez, lost 150 head of cattle when floodwaters rose faster than she could react. Children wake to the sound of helicopters and constant emergency sirens. 8-year-old Tommy Rodriguez has not slept through the night since his family fled their Sebastopol home. His mother, nurse practitioner Lisa Rodriguez, reports that anxiety medications for children have run out at 3 emergency shelters. Agricultural communities face catastrophic losses that will ripple through California's economy for years. The Sonoma County Farm Bureau estimates crop damage exceeding $800 million in wine grapes alone. Small family farms that survive generations face bankruptcy as floodwaters destroy equipment, livestock, and entire seasons of work. Emergency shelters struggle with basic necessities. Potable water runs short as treatment facilities fail. Medical supplies dwindle as delivery trucks cannot navigate flooded roads. Community support networks mobilize despite the chaos, but the scale of displacement overwhelms even the most generous response. For thousands of California families, Christmas 2024 will be remembered not for celebration, but for the night they lost everything to rising water. In the California state capitol, Governor Gavin Newsom convenes an emergency cabinet meeting as damage assessments pour in from across the state. The preliminary numbers are staggering. Infrastructure damage exceeds $15 billion and is climbing. Agricultural losses top $3.2 billion. The economic impact threatens to surpass Hurricane Katrina's devastation. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell arrives in Sacramento within 24 hours of the governor's federal disaster declaration request. The agency faces its largest domestic deployment since Hurricane Sandy, with over 8,000 personnel coordinating relief efforts across 23 counties. But resources are strained immediately as the scale of destruction becomes clear. Political tensions emerge as Congress debates emergency funding allocations. House Republicans question the $50 billion aid package, arguing that California's climate policies contributed to the crisis. Senate Democrats push for immediate approval, warning that delays will cost lives. Insurance industry executives hold emergency meetings as flood damage claims exceed $25 billion in the first week alone. State Farm and Allstate report claim volumes that surpass their annual flood reserves. Many homeowners discover their policies exclude flood damage, leaving them financially devastated. Economic ripple effects spread beyond California's borders. The Port of Oakland, handling 40% of West Coast container traffic, remains closed due to flooding. Supply chain disruptions affect retailers nationwide as holiday inventory sits stranded in flooded warehouses. Tourism industry leaders calculate catastrophic losses as holiday bookings evaporate. Napa Valley wineries report $2 billion in damage to vineyards and facilities. Disneyland closes for the first time due to a natural disaster, affecting 75,000 daily visitors. The California Department of Finance projects state budget shortfalls exceeding $8 billion as tax revenues collapse and emergency spending soars. Political pressure mounts on climate adaptation funding that lawmakers previously considered too expensive. The political calculus is brutal. Invest billions in prevention or spend trillions on repeated disaster response. 1 week after the initial atmospheric river assault, California's emergency operations maintain crisis-level status as floodwaters slowly recede across the state. The National Weather Service continues flood warnings for 15 counties, with river levels remaining dangerously high despite the end of active precipitation. Current flood monitoring shows the Russian River at 8 feet above flood stage, the Salinas River at 12 feet above normal, and the Sacramento River system straining levees that engineers warn could fail with additional rainfall. Over 125,000 residents remain under evacuation orders as officials determine which areas are safe for return. FEMA reports deploying 12,000 personnel across California, the largest domestic disaster response in agency history. Mobile emergency response support units operate in 23 counties, coordinating search and rescue operations that have saved over 3,400 people from floodwaters. Power restoration efforts struggle against continued flooding and infrastructure damage. Pacific Gas and Electric reports 450,000 customers still without electricity, with repair crews unable to access transmission lines in flooded areas. Utility workers describe conditions that make repairs impossible, as standing water continues to threaten critical equipment. The death toll reaches 47 confirmed fatalities, with 23 people still missing across multiple counties. Most deaths occurred when drivers attempted to cross flooded roads, highlighting the deadly underestimation of water depth and current strength. search teams continue operations in areas where bodies may remain trapped in submerged vehicles or debris fields. Agricultural damage assessments reveal catastrophic losses that will affect food prices nationwide. The California Department of Food and Agriculture reports $4.8 billion in crop damage, with entire harvests destroyed across the Central Valley. Economists warn that the agricultural devastation will ripple through the food supply chain for years. Emergency shelter operations house 78,000 displaced residents across 52 facilities, straining resources and volunteer capacity. Officials emphasize that while the immediate crisis phase is ending, the recovery period will test California's resilience for years to come. The lessons of Christmas 2024 reshape emergency planning across the United States as other coastal states review their flood preparedness with newfound urgency. Climate scientists warn that atmospheric river events could intensify along the entire Pacific coast, from British Columbia to Baja California. Washington and Oregon emergency management agencies convene task forces to assess their vulnerability to similar convergence events. The question is no longer whether extreme weather will test other regions, but when and how severely. Infrastructure investment debates take on new urgency in state legislatures across the West Coast. The cost of California's disaster response dwarfs every previous estimate for climate adaptation infrastructure. Levee systems that protected communities for a century failed in hours. Drainage networks designed for historical rainfall patterns proved utterly inadequate for the new reality of atmospheric rivers carrying unprecedented moisture. Federal disaster response protocols face scrutiny as officials acknowledge that existing frameworks cannot handle the scale and speed of climate-driven catastrophes. FEMA's resources, stretched across multiple simultaneous disasters nationwide, reveal the limitations of a system designed for isolated emergencies rather than cascading climate crises. Historical records show that California has faced devastating floods before, but never with the intensity and coordination witnessed during Christmas 2024. The Great Flood of 1862 submerged the Central Valley for months, forcing the state capital to relocate from Sacramento to San Francisco. The 1955 floods killed 74 people and caused billions in damage. But those disasters unfolded over weeks or months, not the compressed timeline of atmospheric rivers that overwhelmed the state in days. Climate scientists continue analyzing the unprecedented storm patterns that brought California to its knees. The three atmospheric rivers that converged simultaneously represent meteorological conditions that climate models projected would not occur until 2040 or later. The acceleration of extreme weather patterns challenges fundamental assumptions about the pace of climate change and society's ability to adapt. International research collaborations examine whether California's floods signal a global shift in atmospheric circulation patterns. Similar extreme weather events across the Northern Hemisphere suggest that the jet stream disruption affecting the Pacific coast is part of a hemisphere-wide reorganization of weather systems. Community resilience emerges as the most powerful force in the recovery effort. Neighbors helping neighbors, churches opening doors to displaced families, and volunteers coordinating relief efforts demonstrate human capacity to respond to crisis. But individual resilience cannot address systemic vulnerabilities that climate change continues to expose. California's recovery will take years, but the state's response to unprecedented flooding provides lessons for climate adaptation nationwide. Yet fundamental questions about climate change acceleration remain unresolved. As communities rebuild and scientists analyze the data, one conclusion becomes clear. The climate crisis is no longer a future threat, but a present reality demanding immediate response. The floods have receded, but the questions they raised about our changing climate continue to flow.